All right, welcome to Farm's weekly Wednesday webinar series. I'm so very excited today because as a follow-up to last week's cottonwood tree bud balm session, we're going to talk about harvesting common garden weeds. If you can't beat them, eat them. That's pretty super cool. These webinars are sponsored by Farms with a grant from the Otto Bremer Foundation. After this session, the recorded version of this webinar will be available for anyone to see on our YouTube channel. We have at least 60 webinars up there, so feel free to pick out something that you want to learn for the rest of the summer because next week will be our very last Wednesday webinar until the fall, which we will start up again with 16 new topics. And we'll also pick up on the 2 or 3 that we were unable to present because of scheduling conflicts. We may also change when these webinars are going to be held. So if you guys would please fill out evaluations, send me comments, suggestions about good times or bad times or good days of the week or bad days of the week. That would be very helpful to us for future grants. So today, I will turn this over to Stephanie and let her begin her presentation because I know we've had a lot of interest in this topic for some reason. Maybe because it's raining now and we're going to have a lot more weeds than anything until our gardens come in. So everybody should stay on mute during the presentation. If you absolutely want to ask a question, you can type it in the chat box, and Stephanie can see that as well as myself. And when she takes a breath, maybe we can interrupt her. Otherwise, there'll be time for questions and answers at the very end of the presentation. And we can already see the presentation on the screen. So Stephanie, take her away.
Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar. I'm really excited about this topic, and I'm excited that there are so many of you interested as well. So my name is Stephanie Blumhagen. I grew up on a farm near Drake, and I chose this topic because edible garden weeds is something that have been on the kitchen table all my life. I've learned to harvest and prepare weeds from my mom, and some of these recipes are ones that she made growing up, and some of them are ones that I have created myself. So we're going to cover just 5 specific weeds today. There are a myriad of edible garden weeds, and I've got some resources at the end of this PowerPoint that you can use to learn to identify even more edible garden weeds. I do not call myself an expert in this field by any means, but it's just something that fascinates me, and I just want to share what I've learned with all of you. So today we're going to talk about nettle, dandelion, lamb's quarters, purslane, and baby Russian thistle. This is one I just learned about last summer. You can eat tumbleweeds when they're small. So I've got some recipes for those as well. And I will pause maybe about halfway through, probably after lamb's quarters, for questions. So I'm just going to start right in with nettles. Urtica dioica is the scientific name, and Wikipedia tells us that they're rich in vitamins A, C, iron, potassium, manganese, and calcium. So they're really nutritious, and they can contain up to 25% protein dry weight, which is high for a leafy green vegetable. So I've learned that we typically find them on our farm in cool, shady, disturbed areas, the north edge of tree rows, because the trees provide shade. The north edge is shadier. The grass is tall there. They like places with high nitrogen, like abandoned corrals. We have abundant nettles in our coulee bottoms as well. So kind of cool, moist places they like. And I'm going to stress with all of these plants, know where you're picking, know what happened before you picked. don't pick anywhere unless you are absolutely positive that it was not sprayed, because I'd sure hate for anybody to get sick from harvesting weeds that were sprayed and they didn't know about it. So you can identify the nettles by their toothed leaves. This is what they look like when they start to flower. And nettles sting. They're commonly known as stinging nettles. So you'll want to wear gloves when you're harvesting and use a scissors or tongs. Or some people just use gloves. Some people just use the tongs. Here in the picture, Mom is wearing gloves and using a scissors. So how does that sting? How do they sting you? Well, they've got tiny hairs on the leaves and the stem. I don't know if I have a close enough picture to show you the hairs. And when you touch them, those hairs break off. They're really brittle. And inside the hair are several chemicals. I always thought it was just formic acid, but Wikipedia lists acetylcholine, histamine, that's what makes them itch, 5-HT, which is serotonin, moroidin, and leukotrienes. So you will get itchy, stingy welts if you touch the nettles with bare hands. So take precautions, wear gloves. You want to pick just the top part of the plant. I try to snip them off under the top set of leaves or the second from the top set of leaves, and you can kind of see where the scissors is in this picture, right underneath that second set of leaves. And you also want to only harvest them early in the season. They're prime for harvesting right now. Once it gets later in the season, they start to get tough and stringy. And you probably should avoid harvesting them after they've flowered and developed seeds. There's lots of differing opinions on this, but Wikipedia said that after it's entered its flowering and seed-setting stage, the leaves develop gritty particles called cystoliths, which can irritate the urinary tract. So better safe than sorry. I wouldn't harvest them after they've flowered and set seeds. And regardless, they're just not going to be very tasty. They're going to be tough and stringy. Last summer, Mom and I went a little crazy, and we packaged and froze about 40 packages of nettles, and we're finding that we probably harvested some that we shouldn't have harvested because we're cooking up nettles and finding that our supper is a little stringy. Okay, so recipes. Cooking will deactivate the sting. It will cause those little hairs to wilt, and they will not sting you any longer. So I usually, after I've harvested a bucket or a bag full or a colander full, I'll take them in the house. I will rinse them in the colander in the sink. And then the simplest thing to do is to steam them or saute them using the water that's clinging to their leaves. So I've got just my basic, simplest nettle recipe here. You harvest as many nettles as you want, keeping in mind that they're going to cook down about like spinach. So they're going to cook down a lot. Rinse them in a colander in the sink. Keep your gloves on or use tongs because they'll sting you until they're cooked. Snip the nettles into smaller pieces. Leave some water clinging to the leaves. Heat some oil in a saute pan or cast iron skillet and lightly saute about 2 to 4 cloves of chopped garlic, depending on how much you like garlic, and a few red pepper flakes. You could add some minced onion if you like that as well. When the garlic is soft, add your nettle and cover, and the water clinging to the leaves will steam your nettle leaves. Cook for about 3 minutes or until they look wilted down and cooked, and then take it off the heat and drizzle a little lemon juice over and salt to taste, and they're ready to serve. So just a really simple, quick lunch or easy supper recipe for those nights when you've been in the garden all evening and need to make supper quickly. Two other recipes, creamy nettle dip, and then I think I have a nettle soup recipe. I'm not going to go through every recipe. I think the PowerPoint slides will be available to you afterwards. But I also use nettle-like spinach in a spinach dip. And I just substitute the nettle for the spinach. This is basically nettle with a white sauce. And it's great with crackers or on crostini. And then stinging nettle soup. This is a recipe that I really like. I took this to I lived in Olympia, Washington, and there were lots of small organic vegetable farms around, and there was one in my neighborhood called Calliope Farm that had Nettle Fest every spring, and that included a nettle potluck with everything from raw nettle fudge to nettle spring rolls to this nettle soup, nettle beer, just everything you can imagine. So I took this nettle soup to that potluck. It's basically cooked nettles in chicken broth with cooked basmati rice, and then you puree it, and the rice makes it nice and thick and rich tasting. And my most recent nettle recipe, nettle noodles. So basically they're green egg noodles. And essentially it's your favorite egg noodle recipe with a half cup to a cup of cooked nettles pureed with the eggs, and then you add the remaining ingredients and the flour. So they come out really nice and bright green, real springy color, and they taste really good. Okay. So just checking if there's any quick questions I need to address. Okay, so, and then I've tried to provide some resources for places you can find other nettle recipes online. And again, Google will produce a myriad of results for nettle recipes. So here's a handful of resources. Okay, dandelions. I'm sure you can identify dandelions. They're abundant in lawns, and they make a great salad. So let's see. So don't pick dandelions anywhere you aren't positive has not been sprayed. I think this is especially important for dandelions because people have a tendency to spray them to try to get rid of them. If they're growing in a dry area, they can get tough and bitter, so pay attention to where you're picking. They taste best if you pick them in a low, shady, damp area. Sometimes places like this will produce dandelions with leaves that are up to a foot long, and that's a really good dandelion harvesting spot. I've also tried saving dandelion seeds and growing them in a pot in winter. They didn't get much more than an inch or two high, but they came up. The buds and flowers are edible too, and again, you can find a zillion recipes online for dandelion flower jelly, dandelion wine. I found a recipe for pickled dandelion buds, or I couldn't download the actual recipe, but I saw a post on Facebook about it. And then people also dig, dry, chop, roast, and grind the roots to make a coffee substitute. Because there's so many recipes for dandelions available online, I've just provided you our basic dandelion salad recipe. I just had this weekend when I was at the farm. Mom made some. And this is a staple on our dinner and supper table during the hot summer months. The garlic, salt, and acidity of the cider vinegar balance out the somewhat bitter flavor of the dandelion greens. And it's really simple. You collect a bowl full of dandelion leaves. You can throw some buds in there too. Rinse them to remove any sand, and then spin them dry and snip them into your bowl. It works really well to snip the dandelions rather than chopping them. And then you whisk together an oil and vinegar dressing, for which I have the recipe on the next slide. And you drizzle your chopped greens with the dressing and you toss. You can add what you like: chopped eggs, sunflower seeds, chopped tomato, avocado, chopped celery, shredded cheese, chopped onion, really whatever is in your cupboard and in your fridge. And here's the recipe for the dressing. It's essentially 2 parts olive oil to 1 part apple cider vinegar. I use a 1/4 cup of olive oil and 2 tablespoons apple cider vinegar, a teaspoon of garlic powder, or 2 or 3 cloves pressed through a garlic press if you have fresh garlic, 1/4 teaspoon black pepper, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And you just whisk that to combine it, and you drizzle it over your salad greens. And it's very versatile. You can add more salt, less salt, more pepper, more garlic powder, or change the ratio of oil to vinegar. It's really customizable to however you like it. Okay, and then here's some more resources for, more resources for dandelions. I've got 3 websites here, and one I saw recently for a sweet and savory dandelion rosemary shortbread. I want to try that one. Okay. And I'm going to move on to lamb's quarters. I hope I'm not moving too fast. I know I have quite a few slides and I want to get through everything and leave time for questions at the end. So we can come back to anything that you'd like to cover in more depth. So lamb's quarters are one of my favorite edible garden weeds. Chenopodium album, and chenopodium means goosefoot because the leaves look like a goose's foot. They tend to have this serrated edge. Sometimes they're pink in the middle. We had picked some really beautiful ones last summer, so I had fun photographing them. You'll find them growing in disturbed areas in your garden and in fields. There's actually 2 different kinds of lamb's quarters that grow here. The one that you've probably seen the most growing in your garden is actually an introduced species that was brought here by European settlers. However, there was a native species growing here already. So the one here on the left has more of a smooth triangular shaped leaf. That's the native species. And then the more serrated leaf is the introduced species. And they're both edible. Okay, so you'll find them in disturbed areas like a garden. I tend to harvest them at about 3 to 5 inches tall before the plant has gone to seed. Pluck them off at the base just above the root. The stems are edible as well. And then you just rinse the dirt or sand off like Mom is doing in this picture. We had picked a whole bucket full in preparation to freeze them. Lamb's quarters are, I think you could eat them raw in a salad. We tend to cook them. The leaves tend to have, if you were to eat them raw, I think you'd find the leaves will have kind of a powdery feel in your mouth. You can see this pink stuff is actually kind of powdery, which is fine. It's just preference. So really basic way, again, you can cook them any way you would cook cooked spinach, and they're great just sautéed or steamed. A basic recipe is to sauté some onions, maybe 1 medium or 2 medium. Add your rinsed and chopped lamb's quarters, leaves and stems, and steam them with the water clinging to the leaves. And then once they're cooked, Season with salt and pepper, and either a dollop of butter melted over or a drizzle of cream is really good with lamb's quarters. Um, and then this is a recipe that my mom has made since I was little, and it actually comes from my grandma. Um, Lamb's quarters with dumplings. So you mix up a basic dumpling dough. I found an herb dumpling recipe with Parmesan cheese. And then you heat milk and broth, and you prepare your lamb's quarters similar to like I just described. Saute onions, and then add the lamb's quarters and steam with the rinse water, with the water still clinging to the leaves. And then you pour your broth and milk over the greens, and you dollop your dumpling batter on top. And you cook until the dumplings are steamed and cooked through. So that's one of my favorite ways to eat lamb's quarters. And then this cream of lamb's quarters soup recipe is also really good and came from PBS, actually. And similar to the nettle soup recipe, except not thickened with rice. This one has some cream in it. Okay. Before I go on to purslane, I said I would pause after lamb's quarters. So does anybody have any questions? Is everybody still with us?
Yes, they are here, but as you know, it takes a couple seconds to unmute a person. So, but I don't see any questions
Yeah.
at the moment. You know, they can hold up their hand. There's a little hand symbol there, and if you click on that, somehow you can hold up your hand. I can't hold up my hand. Oh, there. Karen's got her hand up.
Oh,
Or I won't put it up for her. I don't know.
Marietta said yes. I'm not sure if that's yes, I have a question, or yes, I'm here.
Okay, so now Marietta, you are on here twice.
Oh, she's here. Okay.
And yes, she's here, and I muted her, but she's also muted herself, so I didn't know. Oh, yes, you're here. Okay. Never mind then. I'll shut up so you can finish your presentation.
I will continue on then, and we'll talk about purslane. So last year was a fairly wet year, and we had so much purslane growing. It makes a carpet, as you can see in the large picture on the left side, and really covers the ground. The picture on the right is more of a close-up, so you can see it has thicker leaves and thick rounded stems, so it's got a really crisp, crunchy texture. Its scientific name is Portulaca oleracea, so it's in the same family as moss roses, those ornamental flowers that we often plant in flower beds for ground cover. And if you leave the purslane, it will eventually make a yellow flower that looks a lot like a moss rose. It's really tenacious. Last year I planted in a high tunnel here at the college campus that I planted in August, and the spot had been bare all summer, so it was just dry, powdery dirt with nothing growing in it. And as soon as we put a sprinkler on so that I could plant my rose, the purslane popped up in a perfect circle exactly where the sprinkler had been. So as soon as some moisture hit that soil, those purslane seeds came to life. The stems and the leaves are edible. You can pluck it near the base, just above the root. It's got a slightly tart, tangy flavor, which I really like. It's crisp and crunchy. You could substitute it for cucumber in some recipes. It's great in salads, and you can cook it as well. I've got two online resources here, one from a cooking blog called Chocolate and Zucchini. She did a post on 45 things to do with purslane. In places with larger farmers markets, some farmers will actually cultivate a domestic variety of purslane and sell it at farmers markets. The domestic variety has larger leaves and stems. There are also quite a few purslane recipes on Epicurious, so there's a link to that as well. So my purslane recipes are mixed with Russian thistle, so I'm going to talk about young Russian thistle first. So these are the plants that eventually become those spiny tumbleweeds that blow around and get caught up on the fences. But when they're very small, they're tender and edible. They're crisp and crunchy, and they go really well with purslane because they have a similar crisp texture. You want to pick them when they're about 3 to 4 inches high and before they're too tough and spiny. So this picture on the left is a good size for harvesting them. The picture on the right shows a slightly larger Russian thistle plant. It's getting close to being too big to harvest. And then I thought this picture on the right would almost be a good find all the edible weeds in this picture sort of picture. I see 3 of them. We haven't talked about red root pigweed, and we'll just cover that briefly, but that one's edible too, as well as the purslane. Here's some young Russian thistle and purslane that have just been rinsed, and they're in the colander. So last summer we started harvesting the Russian thistle as well, and I created this recipe with Russian thistle and purslane. So I took a bunch of rinsed purslane, about 2 cups maybe, and a bunch of rinsed Russian thistle, and pulled them into bite-sized pieces. I added a can of garbanzo beans, 1 or 2 tomatoes chopped, 1 or 2 avocados diced, sorry about the spelling error, a bunch of green onion tops snipped. You could add chopped hard-boiled egg as well if you like. And then I mixed up an olive oil and lemon juice dressing, which was equal parts olive oil and lemon juice, 1/4 cup of each. And then I added 6 garlic cloves, minced fine. Again, I like lots of garlic. You could adjust that to your taste. And 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I whisked that in a glass measuring cup until it turned creamy. And I put all the ingredients in a bowl and I tossed with the dressing. Then the salad kind of reminded me of tabbouleh salad with the lemon and all those flavors. You could even add some mint to make it even more like tabbouleh. Another recipe that I created last summer was I called it an Italian-Russian frittata, Russian thistle frittata with Italian seasoning. And looking at it, it's almost a Greek recipe. Basically, it was young Russian thistle with tomatoes and chopped onion. So I sautéed the onion, added the drained tomatoes and the chopped Russian thistle. I heated that through, and then I poured beaten egg over. Let that cook until the eggs started to set, and then I sprinkled with chopped oregano and chopped basil, and then I sprinkled with feta cheese and let it cool and served it in wedges. So we enjoyed that recipe as well. So a few key points to take away. Why bother with edible weeds when you're growing greens in your garden? Well, weeds are often the first edible things to come up. Dandelions and nettles are typically the very first. This year, there were dandelions and nettles ready to harvest the last week of April. Garden weeds are nutritious, as nutritious or more nutritious than some of the greens that we plant. I mean, if you're getting your weeds from your garden, they're growing in the same soil that your spinach and your lettuce are growing in. They require no tending, and the seed is already in the soil, so it's essentially free food. Just needs to be harvested. Most of these weeds work well as a frozen green. You can use the same instructions you would use for freezing spinach, especially for nettles and lamb's quarters. I think we froze some Russian thistle and purslane as well. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, Mom. So you would blanch the greens in boiling water for 2 minutes. I'm assuming that you have frozen greens in the past, so I'm not going into too much detail. So blanch for 2 minutes, immerse in cold water, squeeze out the excess water, and then package in your freezer bags. Then we flatten the bags and remove the air so that they don't freezer burn, and so they lay flat in the freezer, and then you freeze them. And then you'll have greens to eat all winter long. I've not tried this myself, but Mom freezes dandelion leaves. She doesn't blanch them. They're a little wilty, but they will make a salad in January when you're craving salad. And they're pretty good. Let's see. Any recipe that calls for cooked spinach can be made with cooked lamb's quarters or nettle. So spinach lasagna you could make with weeds. What else? Spanakopita you could make with weeds. In anything, spinach dip, anything that you would use cooked spinach for. There's a few other edible weeds. There's actually a lot of other edible weeds, and the books on the next slides will guide you to other edibles. But here are a few that I have tried. I haven't tried the curly dock, but mallow is down in the right-hand corner. It's got round leaves. It can be a little bit mucilaginous. It makes a good filler in a salad. It doesn't have a whole lot of flavor on its own. It's kind of an uninteresting plant to eat, but you could add it to other greens for a salad. And that's a very common one. Redroot pigweed, that's very common, and that is edible. You can eat it cooked, similar to lamb's quarters. It also didn't have a ton of flavor, but you could add it to other greens. I think we did a greens blend last summer where we froze pigweed, lamb's quarters, and purslane and Russian thistle all together, and have been eating that all winter. Okay, this is a picture of burdock burrs. The burrs are not edible. I chose this picture because it was an easily identifiable picture. With burdock, what is edible is the root. It has a very, very long taproot, which can be a bit of a chore to wrestle out of the ground. And then you can peel and boil the taproot. In Asian cultures, it's known as gobo, and it's supposed to lend strength and virility from eating it. And some farmers cultivate burdock just for the root to sell at Asian markets. Curly dock, I have not tried this one yet myself, but many of the books I have say that it's edible. And then chickweed. Chickweed also is good in salads and is fairly common in gardens. I've put together a list of good books on edible weeds and wild plants. This top one, the Encyclopedia of Edible Plants of North America, is kind of our weed Bible at the farm. Mom uses that one a lot. Yule Gibbons, Stalking the Wild Asparagus, he was pretty well known in the, I suppose, 60s and 70s. This was published in 1962. And actually, I guess I learned recently that he was a spokesperson for grape nuts. let's see, Edible Wild Plants of the Prairie is a good one. This All Good Things Around Us has beautiful illustrations, and I'm going to buy a second copy so that I can take it apart and frame some of the pages. Handbook of North Dakota Plants is a good guide for identifying some of these plants. It's a plant handbook specifically for North Dakota. And then these last two, Edible Garden Weeds of Canada and Wild Green Vegetables of Canada, are part of a 4-part series. I found these in our college library up here at Dakota College. And these two have some really great recipes that I hadn't heard of before. So I don't know if they're hard to get hold of, but I'm gonna keep them checked out and work through all the different recipes in those books. Here's just some book covers so you can, Stalking the Wild Asparagus. This is the All Good Things Around Us is the one with the beautiful illustrations. And then this is our Weeds Bible, Encyclopedia of Edible Plants of North America. It's quite a large book and pretty thick, and it's got a lot of information. And then 4 websites that you might find helpful. Mother Earth News has quite a few articles about edible weeds. This gather I just discovered while I was looking for pictures and information for this. It's a website of all recipes for wild foods. Hunter, Angler, Gardener, Cook. He does lots of edible wild plants. And then Edible Wild Food is a magazine. You may have to subscribe, but I hope they have some information online. Okay. Now is time for questions. Okay. So Marietta, you have Yule Gibbons' book. Have you what weeds have you harvested from that book, and what have you made?
Muted. Can you hear me, Stephanie? Can you hear me, Stephanie?
Now I can hear you.
Actually, I have found the bottom of the cattail stalk, and we've eaten that. And I've also harvested young cattails when they have 2 heads for and eaten those. I've collected the pollen from cattails and made a flour out of it to add to cookies and quick breads.
Neat. Those are all things I've never tried. Well, except with the exception of Mom and I have dug up the roots of the young cattails, or just the top of the root, and I made a stir fry of those once.
I think Adam Mobby did a science fair or some kind of project in high school where he actually pickled young cattail, the tops of them.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Like the brown top?
I think they were green at the time, though.
Before cattails are brown, they are green.
Yes. So the green ones were the ones I think that he harvested and pickled for this project.
I think we've steamed those and eaten them like corn on the cob.
Oh, wow.
With a little butter.
Yes, we have also. Yes.
What did you think? We found them a bit bland.
They tasted good with salt and butter.
Yes.
Welcome to the Starship Enterprise.
Yes.
So how did you guys get started eating weeds?
Karen Blumhagen, do you want to answer that? because Mom is the reason I eat weeds.
Which sounds hilarious. I eat weeds. You need to get a t-shirt made.
Yes.
I eat weeds. She's not going to answer you, is she?
I'm not sure what she's here.
I can answer.
I can answer.
I bought Yule Gibbons' book,
Oh,
and that started me.
Cool. Okay, so Mom said that she started eating weeds because Grandma, her mother, ate lamb's quarters and prepared them for the family.
wow. That's pretty weird. I wonder if they did it for just the reason that there wasn't any fresh food over the winter, like, no supermarkets and things like we have nowadays, do you think?
I don't know.
Weird, huh?
I think a lot of Mom said she's always been interested in doing things naturally. Yes, definitely.
I'm with you there.
Some of these plants, like the native lamb's quarters, were already being eaten by the Native American people that lived here before the white settlers arrived. And so maybe some of the white settlers learned from them, and maybe they ate some of these plants out of necessity. Perhaps they knew about. And some of these are things that they were maybe eating in Europe already. Mom talked to a German settler in Sheridan County who, what did he bring over? Some seeds of a plant related to lamb's quarters. And one of the books, let's see, I think it was the Edible Plants of the Prairie, he was from, let me finish my other thought. The edible plants, I think it was Edible Plants of the Prairie, included some research by, I think he was an ethnobotanist, and he interviewed Native American people, and they had knowledge passed down about things like using the lamb's quarters seeds and how to turn them into a flour by soaking them and pounding them, and so these are not new ideas. The plant that's like lamb's quarters is called lebda, and it's from the Ukraine. And I should also point out that I think there's quite a few other people in the area that eat weeds. Holly Mobby has done presentations. Hers is called Eat Your Weedies. And Julia Petrovic harvests nettles, I believe, and I think she said she uses nettles to curdle milk for cheese making. And I just saw a Facebook picture of her display table at a I don't know, health fair, I guess, and she had dried nettles for sale. Which I should also, I didn't mention that nettles can be dried and added to soups in the winter or made into tea.
Well, do we have any other questions for Stephanie? This is your opportunity to ask questions. Otherwise, you're just going to have to listen to the recording.
Karen, Mom, do you have any tips on cooking purslane? There was one that I didn't include, but I know that she cooks purslane because she's served it. Did you just steam it with salt and pepper and butter? Okay, so steamed with butter, salt, and pepper. And most of these recipes are just things that I made up. So that's, once you've tried the weeds once just steamed, you can kind of get a sense for what each plant tastes like, and then you can just go crazy. You can research online and find all sorts of recipes, or you can make up your own or substitute them for other greens in recipes. Any recipe that calls for, you could stir fry them like Chinese cabbage or spinach. You could replace spinach in any cooked spinach recipe. You could make all sorts of salads out of them. You could do like a taco salad with dandelion greens in it, or purslane. Purslane might be good in a taco salad. It's really up, as creative as you want to be. Let's see. And again, go ahead.
Well, that's all right. I was just going to see if anybody else had any more questions, because there's a lot of dead silence on my recording.
I think we're shy.
Oh, well, and there's that feedback issue all the time.
Yeah. Well, I guess one thing I just want to make sure that I reiterate, if you are new to this, I would get hold of one of these books, especially this identification guide, the Handbook of North Dakota Plants, or another plant ID guide. There's lots of them. Or I would find somebody who has foraged before and ask them to take you. And always be sure that you know where you are picking. Know if it's been sprayed before. If you don't know, I maybe would find a different place to harvest. Hopefully you have a yard or a garden spot that's growing these plants, or maybe there's a pasture that you either own or have permission to be in, or a field if you know for certain that it's been farmed organically or that there aren't chemicals in there.
Oopsie. Yeah, this might be your excuse to tell your husband not to spray your lawns because it's bad for the environment. And then you can eat your dandelions instead of anything else, see, so.
Yes. I think I convinced Dad to hold off spraying a summer fallow field for a week or two because I was harvesting all sorts of beautiful dandelions out of it.
Sweet. We wanted to pick today, but it's still a little wet out. My granddaughter's coming, so I get to babysit this afternoon.
Oh, perfect activity for kids.
I know, right? They got little hands, are close to the ground.
They love picking dandelions.
Oh, shoot. Well, super. All right, guys, hearing no more questions, I'm going to release you all so you can go back to work. Isn't that going to be special?
Thank you all for participating in the webinar. I appreciate having you here today, and I hope you go out and try a new edible weed that you haven't tried before.